One of the issues in this industry is that whenever somebody does take care of marketing, they do not look at the right metrics and they don't look at the right numbers. When it comes to the one number that you should care about, it is not going to be cost per lead. Normally, you have remodelers thinking, oh, here's a vendor, they're giving us a cheaper cost per lead. That's a better decision. That's somebody we need to work with. Or they might be like, the lead is too expensive. That's way too much. We shouldn't work with them. Neither of those concepts, or even vice versa, saying that cheaper is better or cheaper is worse, neither of them is the right decision or the right way to go about it. Like if you have a vendor or if you're working with somebody to take care of your marketing side and you fire them just because it's got expensive, it's likely a wrong answer. Even if leads go cheap, that is also likely a wrong answer. Neither of them are looking at the right number. The wrong number is CPL, right? What vendors report, what gets compared, and eventually what makes you fire somebody. Now, a $90 meta lead or $400 Google lead don't mean that much if it's just by itself, right? You're just paying for a phone number, the name of a person, you're paying for somebody's contact and for them being interested in your business, right? Cheaper isn't better there, neither is it worse. Expensive isn't worse either, neither is it necessarily better. What does actually matter is your cost per acquisition or even cost per job closed, however you want to call it. CPA is a pretty normal number. Now, that is basically just your total ad spend divided by your jobs closed. That's the only thing that matters. Pretty simple. Cost per acquisition, not cost per lead, cost per acquisition. Healthy range, right? If you're selling a $40,000 to $65,000 kitchen, should be like 1,000 to 2,500. If it's 2,500 to 4K, then likely something is leaking. And if it's 4K plus, that is definitely a problem. Reason being, again, why did I decide those numbers? It's pretty simple, right? Because you have margins that matter, right? In the industry, you're basically doing maybe somewhere around 35 to 40%. Your net profit after overhead might be 5 to 12%. So with a 50K kitchen, right, you're netting around 4K. If your cost per acquisition is 2,500 on that, you're spending 60% of your net profit acquiring that job before anything goes wrong on site, before anything gets delayed, before your crew has some issue or the materials have some issue, right? And most people will value the cost per acquisition against job value, measure it against what you actually keep to. That changes everything, right? What is your gross profit per job? Or rather, even net profit per job. That is what will ultimately matter in the end. If you're in the owner position, even if you pay yourself a nice salary, right? We want to increase net profit while obviously providing the best service possible. But that is ultimately the number that matters, the cost per acquisition, because that decides your gross profit per job. Now, you will not be able to scale without this, right? Like, if you don't know your cost per acquisition, you can't increase spend confidently. You can't find where the funnel leaks. You can't make vendor decisions on numbers, vendors control. And you hit a revenue ceiling that you will not be able to explain. A pretty simple example of this, right, is let's just say you're running ads. You have one vendor for Meta, one vendor for Google. The Meta guy is like $100 is a great cost per lead. The Google guy is like, oh, we're getting in a lead for $300. But if you end up spending 4,000 on Meta for the month and 6,000 on Google, right? Get 40 leads in Meta, 20 leads in Google, and you close maybe one job out of that, how much are you actually profiting? Even if you ended up closing a $60,000 job, you spent 10K on marketing, we got 60K back in job revenue. Like your cost per acquisition is what actually matters, right? You might be like, oh, we got 40 leads from here, 20 leads from here, we got 60 extremely interested leads, but we only ended up getting one job. And what's your cost per acquisition? It becomes $10,000. It's like the $100 for a meta lead makes no sense. It makes absolutely no difference. If you're paying 10K for a job, even if you half that, 5K for a job, when you're netting maybe around 6K on that job, Like that doesn't make sense, right? Like that's why that number is that important. And this tends to be the scaling bottleneck, right? Like not bad leads, not bad vendors. It's just no clarity on what it actually costs to acquire a job. Even over here, right? The important thing is it's not like you can't scale further. Obviously, you can keep buying leads, but you're not going to be able to scale competently and profitably. You're going to get involved in overheads and projects that you cannot handle and that you should not handle without it being profitable. And that is why this number is essential. Like having deep clarity over this, over your channels decides everything. At the end of the day, like as you're scaling higher, I mentioned this before too, but I've just seen that you want to allocate capital if you want to grow. If you don't have a deep clarity of your numbers, you cannot competently allocate capital. It's just physically impossible. uh, so yeah, pay attention, right? And beyond that too, right? Let's just say you are tracking, which at least is decent. Good to know that your attribution might be broken, right? If a lead comes in via Meta, they're nurtured for 6 weeks, but they close on a call, and you credit it to a referral just because they mentioned somebody, it kind of changes where and what is bringing in the impact. And that's why attribution is extremely important, especially if you're in a 2 3 or above, maybe 10, 20, 30 million a year range. I think it's definitely worth investing in learning and implementing attribution tech. And that is going to be the second thing to fix, actually, not the first one. The first one is make sure that you know what your cost per acquisition is. Second is obviously fix your attribution. At the very least, you want to have basic awareness of numbers. Now, before you fire your next vendor, right? Before you move budget, before you decide Meta isn't working, you got to find your cost per closed job, compare it to what you actually net. That number will tell you more than any CPL report ever will. And that should give you a lot better clarity over the direction that your business is going, what the bottlenecks are. Perhaps even a service might be too expensive and have too less of a profit. And you will not be able to know that, especially if you're stuck in the day to day, because you'll be busy with the smaller problems of the business that you wouldn't be able to have an eagle eye view, right? This is essentially the important number: gross profit per job. I hope that helped. If you guys have any questions, feel free to comment down below. You can text me on LinkedIn too. We can have a chat. This is always something I'm enthusiastic. I'm interested in talking about, especially if you want to check how your marketing is going. You want like a audit to see where the gaps are. Feel free to text me. Have a nice day.